Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity. So I'm going to pick up on work that we've been doing on Blue Waters, but also some of the DOE systems. And the real idea here is when you have a very large number of ensemble simulations where each ensemble member is a standalone MPI task in of itself. We're not talking about methods. We're not talking about processes. We are talking about a standalone MPI task. And when you have 10 to the power 6, 10 to the power 8, 10 to the power 9, how do you get them to run on machines like Blue Waters, and obviously soon A21 and Summit, and then Frontier and others, so on. So that's the computer science component of this Blue Waters award. But obviously this is driven by several important science cases, and I want to take a few seconds to try to distinguish between what people call high throughput computing, an elegant talk we just heard a few minutes ago by Paul Moran, and what I call the ensemble model of computing. And there are, no surprises, many, many challenges, but in the interest of time, I will focus on two. Just let you into a bit of the resource management challenges when you're running thousands, 10,000s, millions of independent MPI jobs. What are the kind of system-level software capabilities that you need to be able to control? You cannot leave it to the system scheduler to do alone. And obviously, what are some of the software challenges? And this is not so much about performance, but it is about giving users the combined capacity of performance on the one hand, as well as the flexibility to program statistically the ensemble models, or ensemble algorithms that they may come up with. And that's where a lot of the algorithmic and scientific innovation is, but you cannot expect every domain scientist to be able to do the fine-grained tuning of all the multiple layers of performance in between. So that's a software challenge. And since I'm not doing modesty today, I'll produce just one single slide, and Paul knows what I'm referring to. I'll produce one slide, the science highlight, which has been done on Blue Waters, and the publication is out there, to really tell you that this is not just me as a theoretical computer scientist telling you things, but we can beat, thanks to these approaches and these algorithmic innovations, we can beat the billion-dollar efforts of D.E. Shaw, and that is very much the highlight science that I'll be talking about. And then picking up on Rick's elegant talk from last night, just try to tell you about the next frontier. So the ensemble-based approach is obviously powerful, and even without machine learning, just classical advanced sampling algorithms beat the single trajectory, even on the Anton machine. But I invite you to imagine what we could do when we could bring the power of AI for science, as alluded to yesterday, with the scale that I'm trying to build up here. So that's the overview. Obviously, the devil's in the details. So lots of points to consider. Ensemble computational model, few things to keep in mind. I4, independent, idempotent, essentially identical, and insensitive to order. These are the 4 properties that the ensemble model must have. And not captured in the I4 is the fact that you are really trying to get the collective property. So it's not like high-energy physics, where if a few of the runs are never collected again or never assembled, then it doesn't affect the statistics. In the ensemble model, the collective results are important. Now, I just want to point out, some people may not agree with this ensemble model of computation, but this is the ensemble model of computation of relevance currently, right? And no surprises, the kind of performance challenges this introduces are distinct from your traditional strong and weak scaling of a single component. Just to highlight a couple, you're really now thinking about the number of ensemble models, n subscript e, at a given instant of time, which might be significantly less than the total number of ensemble models that you need to simulate. Okay. And just to try to give you one non-related to this is, when you can do ensemble models, you can get science that you simply cannot by having lower number of ensemble models. So we heard this nice talk by Salma Cook a short while ago about the ROMS model for coastal simulation. And this is trying to tell you is that if you do not have an adequate number of ensemble models, the prediction of where the jet stream would break up really varies, and it's very noisy, as opposed to being able to devote not just the right number of ensemble models, but also the right amount of computational science. And so this is, again, work very much in process. Okay, But I'm focusing on ensemble biomolecular simulations. This is work done with Cecilia Clementi and others at Rice University, Stanford University, Vijay Pandey and others. The results today are very much those with Cecilia. And just as a quick primer, I think everybody knows that molecular dynamics is really about integrating Newton's equations over many time steps to get the adequate timescales. Debate over the past decade or two, is it really a single MD simulation at high fidelity, or should you be doing, let's say, many smaller simulations, repeats? And again, there's issues of ergodicity and others, but I think it's emerged very strongly in the biomolecular community that a statistical approach, where you may end up doing thousands of ensemble models, has potential to study phenomena that the single simulation approach simply cannot. So ergodicity contained, there are still reasons why you want to do the multiple ensemble approaches. And obviously, from the very other end of the spectrum, our friend D. Shaw built the Anton supercomputer, predicated on the assumption that single long simulations will get you where you can't. And obviously, this famous 2012 science paper was kind of the highlight of the Anton, showing for the first time when you get to 800 milliseconds, you start seeing phenomena for the first time never seen before, right? So I pose it as a validation, as a question. Can ensemble-based algorithms do better than specialized hardware? And with the usual caveats and constraints, the answer is going to be yes. Okay. But it's not just ensemble models that we are talking about. There is a variation on the theme. Namely, these ensemble models need to be interacting. Interacting in the sense results are produced, the results are analyzed, and based upon the analysis, the next stages of what's going to be computed has to be determined. We call this adaptive ensemble algorithms. Some people will call this in situ analysis. But the important point is you determine, and I don't see Tom here, Tom Chetham's one of the masters in this, in the sense of doing the replica exchange, where you're constantly doing exchanges, and based upon some of these interactions, you decide what more you want to do. So that's the definition of adaptive ensemble, and the real power is not just in the ensemble, but in the adaptive ensemble method. And sometimes the data is internal, as in generated by the simulations themselves. Sometimes, and increasingly important, the data is external. And in this case, again from the ML.MD group, this is using cryo-EM data to try to determine what the next steps should be. This is resolution exchange, a variation on the replica exchange. And it's this power of being able to ingest experimental data or data generated through other computational processes to determine what we're going to compute next. So again, as a computer scientist, there's a plethora of challenges to be able to do this at scale. One is obviously, as I've alluded to, is the resource management. How do you get, as of now, 10 to the power 4, 10 to the power 5, 10 to the power 6 interacting MPI jobs? And obviously, if you do a simple back-of-the-envelope calculation, we're talking about somewhere in the range of 6 to 9, depending upon the size of the individual MPI jobs. But there's a lot more. When you start running millions of MPI jobs, the platform looks very different than when you're running a single MPI job. You get heterogeneous and dynamic performance out of the machine. And so now you've got essentially identical simulations, but they're getting different performance variation or performance capabilities from the same platform. And this has been studied, interestingly, by many others, again, out of Lawrence Livermore and elsewhere. But we've seen this arguably for the first time in the multiple ensemble of MD simulations. And again, this is, again, another Blue Waters result where when you run the same simulations, in this case, 1,000 ensembles of varying numbers, on different days, so not only is there a fluctuation at a given instant of time, but the fluctuation seems to be drawn from different distributions at different points of time. So this is not what I'm going to talk about, but this is just to whet your appetite that this is a significant challenge, a real first-order computer science challenge in order to support the science questions that we're asking. Okay? And something that I'm spending an increasing amount of time is when you have heterogeneous tasks, MPI jobs, which could be either spatially heterogeneous in the sense different number of core counts, or importantly, different data and different temporal durations. What's the right execution model? Historically, we've just done simple late binding, But when you, and again, we have proof that when you increase the degrees of heterogeneity, resource heterogeneity, workload heterogeneity, and resource dynamism, there's a part of phase space, pardon the schematic, where this simple late binding task, place any task on any resource subset is okay, breaks down. You need efficient, you need more sophisticated execution models of mapping tasks, heterogeneous tasks, onto heterogeneous resources. So this is the underlying research agenda, and I'll move on. Okay, so how have we been solving this on Blue Waters? I've shown this schematic before, but allow me to just quickly run through this. The core essential idea is that of the pilot abstraction, which at the heart of it is trivial and almost mind-bogglingly simple, in the sense that you take resources, a large resource, 1,000 nodes, whatever, and you create the right MPI processes so that you can create a scheduling overlay. And you then control the scheduling overlay. And what you are able to then do is, instead of submitting a direct task into the job, you submit an empty pilot job, which goes in, goes through the batch queue system, goes through the whole queuing system, waits, and then once it becomes active, it dials back home in some particular way. The details are important, whether it's a pull-based model, push-based model, whether it's subscriber, publish subscriber. Invariant of the details, the point is this pilot job becomes active, and then obviously it, as in the pilot agent on behalf of the user, has now control over the resources, and it can assign tasks as and where it thinks. And if you go back to the execution model, now you can, once you come up with the right execution model, you have the framework to try to execute it. Okay, so this is some of the more formalization of the execution model, which I'll come back to if there's time at the end. But what I want you to just quickly appreciate is, in all of this, the challenge is to be able to place tasks in, possibly take them out, and these tasks could be as short running as a few minutes or even less. And in order to do this, what you have to do is you have to do a lot more than just talk to the batch queue system. You actually have to go in and you have to create a scheduling overlay over the MPI, if you will, resource network. And obviously I'm not going to go through the details, but just to give you a sense of the complexity of the system software that is needed, think of these think of this box as the pilot system capability at the top, these round ones being the tasks. And what we're going to do is going to create a communication network over the, let's say in this case, Blue Waters, and these are individual nodes of Blue Waters. And again, lots of details here. What you're seeing is the pilot agent, pilot job has gone in. Before it starts doing anything with the tasks at the top, it's now creating a scheduling overlay, first a communication overlay, and it's building up the infrastructure, which then allows you, as the user, the flexibility to place tasks as and where required. Okay, so, and then thereafter it's quite simple. Bring tasks in, bring tasks out, so on and so forth. Obviously still a lot of communication. For those of you interested, we can give you numbers on how many messages are in flight, and you have to manage all of those. But the upshot, once again, is what is the performance, right? And let's just look at the high end, about 128K. And the red part is what you should be focusing on. And you see that for tasks, MPI jobs, where the duration is less than 6 minutes, that is approximately 360 seconds, this network that we built in is very difficult to keep fully occupied. And at 128K, we're seeing a utilization of less than approximately 30%, right? Obviously, as the tasks get longer, the amount of utilized resource, effective utilization increases. But conversely, as the tasks get smaller, and there are good scientific reasons why you might have less than 10 minutes or 6 minutes duration, sometimes you're going to get lower and lower efficiency. And I've not talked about, as of now, the complications arising from the different types of communication between the ensembles. Here's box standard replica exchange. Here's what I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes, where you run a swarm of them, and then some die out, some have to be paused, or some principal component analysis, or this is the work with Peter Coveney, where you may have actual binding free energy protocols which might be adapted, shut down, increased, so on and so forth, right? And so the particular tool we developed to support all of this is called the Ensemble Toolkit. And what this does is really promotes, if you will, ensembles as a first-class programming entity. It gives you an interface where you can now start statistically and expressing your algorithm as an ensemble program, or I should say your ensemble algorithm as a program, and obviously the execution of all of that. Won't get into the software details, but this is a building block approach where this now uses the pilot layer below without ever being cognizant of what is being used to do all the runtime management, okay? For those of you who are interested in the software aspects, I invite you to read this paper. So let me get to the highlight of the science result. So if you can do this kind of simulation, right, where you can run hundreds and thousands of them, make some intelligent decisions of which one to stop, which one to grow, what can you do better? And as I said, I'm going to benchmark our ability against this very famous 2012 paper by D. Shaw, where it takes several proteins, is now trying to see the space, physical space sampled, and these are measures, very quick measures of parts of phase space measured. And this one is the famous slide that the famous diagram I told you. This is for villain, that is after 800 milliseconds start showing new areas. When you take this approach of large number of ensembles interacting, stopping, starting, but all within the same job, highlights here are between 2 orders to 3 orders of magnitude improvement. And this is probably the better one. The blue is the D. Shaw reference, and higher is better. How much parts of phase space do you actually get to? And you can see that in this particular case, you get to a much higher part, a larger part of phase space sample. This one a bit more modest, but still, depending upon how much you're covering, still at some aspect an order of magnitude, and definitely an order of magnitude on the last one. Obviously, these are toy, simple proteins. Clearly, doing these at scale will convince you why we need to do the 10 to the power 6, 10 to the power 9. Okay, so the title of the talk was The Next Frontier. Maybe I should have said The Next Frontiera, because a lot of what I've just told you is the starting, is by no means the end. And
already given you the time, Shantenu.
This is for more. Okay. So the idea is, how do you build the runtime systems on not just Blue Waters, not just A21, not just Summit, but in a general purpose, because I've shown you how difficult it is to build up this generalizable, extensible overlay. And so this is where we work with the ECP. Again, don't have details, don't have time for the details, but we're now trying to use what is called the next generation PMI, Process Management Interface, PMI-X, and we're now trying to build up the capabilities of creating the scheduling overlay using PMI-X, and hopefully we will see performance improvements as well as obviously a certain level of generalization and portability across different MPI flavors, right, as well as queuing system flavors. And the real highlight is a commitment from, in this case, the ECP and the PMI-X process to really think of this in an abstract sense. You're looking at 1 million individual processes in order to reach exascale, over 50K nodes, and you want to be able to start this in under 30 seconds. And so if we are able to do this, trust me, for a 6-minute job, we'd get somewhere close to 90+% utilization. That is our goal. Okay, so if you allow me just 2 minutes extra, I don't know where I am. So you heard Rick's talk yesterday about merging, and Dave Key's yesterday about trying to bring AI for science, merged with HPC. I don't think I need to say more about this, but this is, again, work we've been doing with Jeffrey Fox, where we talk about learning everywhere. We come up with different, if you will, in this case, simple classifications of the ways in which ML, generally put not just deep learning, can work with HPC. And there's examples of each of these: auto-tuning, after HPC, around HPC, control, all drawn from molecular science. And for those of you interested, again, there's a paper there presented recently at IPDPS. The point I'm trying to get at then is, how do you take these new capabilities of machine learning and simulations of the type I've alluded to and bring them to run together? Notice, this is not simulations in one phase, machine learning in another, and then possibly coming back and doing. This is all in situ at the same time. And if you think about this, this requires many of the resource management aspects I alluded to. Just now, the heterogeneity is not just in the simulation, but it's in the machine learning and in the simulation and machine learning. And so we're, again, working with several people I'll mention in a while to try to think of this in the context of drug resistance and a particular project, INSPIRE. And this is the real initial project on Frontera where, given the large face space of possible drug candidates that we could either determine or try to understand the space of drug resistance, can we develop methods that supplement traditional, straightforward HPC? We're talking about, in this particular project that involves GSK and others, we're looking at about 10K to 100K mutations. Not a chance in hell are we going to be able to do this brute force with HPC alone. So can we build the surrogate models that allow us to reduce the computation, as well as obviously allow us, picking up on the active learning and reinforcement learning from yesterday, tell us which of the many simulations and drug candidates that can be studied, ought to be studied, so that optimal design of experiments. And so that's what this work is all about. Some of the same resource management issues, and really just closing out, is what's a reference architecture for a learning system, as alluded to yesterday, that would allow us to support not just this particular type of ML with HPC, but all the types of ML for HPC, the 4 categories, the 4 scenarios that I alluded to. And that's, again, very much work in progress, and hopefully we'll see some of this develop on Frontera. But the connection with the earlier part is not only are there algorithmic similarities of determining which simulations to do next, but the system software and the resource management of dynamic, adaptive, and heterogeneous workflows are similar. Okay, so I close. Greg's being not so subtle. I hope I've convinced you the power of many, both the algorithmic and methodological advances. It's not just ensemble-based, it's adaptive ensemble-based, benchmarked against the state-of-the-art D. Shaw single trajectory. Requires careful thinking about the abstractions and the middleware, performance engineering, and hopefully this is the basis for a lot more of the ML and HPC combined. Thank you.